My name is Sarah, and I never believed in miracles until a 6-month-old golden retriever puppy named Hope proved me wrong. But let me start from the beginning because this story isn't just about getting lost. It's about finding something I never knew I was searching for. It was a Tuesday morning in November when my world turned upside down. I'd been hiking the familiar trails of Pine Ridge Forest for 3 years, ever since my divorce. These walks were my therapy, my escape from the suffocating silence of my empty house. The doctors had been clear about my progressive vision loss, retinitis pigmentosa they called it. I had maybe 2 years before complete blindness would claim me. That morning I decided to take Hope with me for the first time. She was a rescue puppy I'd adopted just 2 weeks earlier, born completely blind due to a genetic defect. The shelter volunteers had warned me about the challenges, but something about her resilient spirit spoke to my soul. Maybe it was because we were both learning to navigate a world without sight. The weather forecast had promised clear skies, but Mother Nature had other plans. As we reached the halfway point of our usual 3-mile loop, dark clouds rolled in with terrifying speed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes, and the first raindrops felt like ice bullets against my skin. "Come on, Hope," I called, pulling her leash gently. "We need to head back." But as the storm intensified, something went terribly wrong. The familiar path I'd walked hundreds of times seemed to vanish beneath sheets of rain. My limited vision, already compromised by the cloudy weather, became completely useless. The landmarks I relied on, the distinctive boulder, the old oak tree, the wooden bridge, all disappeared into a gray, wet void. Panic crept up my throat like bile. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was already cracked from a recent drop, and the water damage made it completely black. No GPS, no compass, no way to call for help. We were 3 miles from the parking lot, but which direction? Hope pressed against my leg, her small body trembling. I knelt beside her, both of us already soaked to the bone. "I'm sorry, girl," I whispered, tears mixing with rainwater on my cheeks. "I don't know how to get us home." The storm showed no mercy. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. I tried retracing our steps, but every direction looked the same, a maze of trees and shadows that my failing eyes couldn't interpret. Hours passed. My legs ached, my clothes were plastered to my skin, and hypothermia was becoming a real threat. I'd led us in circles, each dead end crushing my hope a little more. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman losing her sight, lost in a storm with a blind puppy as her only companion. But then something extraordinary happened. As I sat on a fallen log, defeated and preparing to accept our fate, Hope began to behave differently. She stood up, her nose working frantically in the air. Her ears perked up in a way I'd never seen before, rotating like tiny satellite dishes picking up a signal. Suddenly, she tugged on her leash with surprising determination for such a small dog. Not frantically but with purpose. She looked back at me, or rather turned her head in my direction since she couldn't actually see me, and whimpered softly. "What is it, Hope?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the storm. She tugged again, more insistently this time. Something in her posture told me she knew something I didn't. Call it desperation, call it intuition, but I decided to trust her. I stood up, my joints protesting after sitting in the cold rain. "Hey girl. Show me." And that's how our impossible journey home began, led by a blind puppy who somehow saw what I couldn't. Hope moved with a confidence that defied logic. Her small paws found purchase on slippery rocks I couldn't even see, navigating fallen branches and muddy patches with an uncanny sense of direction. I stumbled behind her, my hiking boots squelching in the mud, completely dependent on this 6-month-old puppy who had never been on these trails before. "Where are you taking us, Hope?" I whispered, but she was focused, her entire body language speaking of purpose and determination. The rain had turned the forest into a treacherous obstacle course. I slipped twice in the first 10 minutes, once sliding down a small embankment that I didn't even realize was there until I was tumbling through wet leaves and thorns. Each time, Hope stopped and waited patiently for me to catch up, never pulling too hard on the leash, never rushing ahead beyond my reach. What struck me most was how she moved. This wasn't the tentative, careful navigation I'd observed during our short walks around the neighborhood. This was different, purposeful, almost as if she could see the path ahead. But that was impossible. The veterinarian had been clear. Hope was born with bilateral microphthalmia, severely underdeveloped eyes that couldn't detect even the faintest light. After what felt like an hour of following her lead, we reached what appeared to be a stream. I could hear water rushing over rocks swollen by the storm. This wasn't part of our original trail. I was certain of that. We'd never crossed water before. Hope, this isn't right, I said, gently pulling back on the leash. We need to find the main trail. But she whimpered and pulled forward again more insistently. She waded into the shallow water without hesitation, her small body shivering but determined. Against every instinct telling me this was wrong, I followed. The water was freezing and came up to my knees at the deepest point. Hope guided us diagonally across, avoiding what I later realized must have been deeper sections and dangerous currents. On the other side, she shook herself off and immediately continued forward, never pausing to question the route. As we walked, I began to notice something extraordinary. Hope wasn't just randomly wandering. She was making deliberate choices at every fork in the path. When we reached a Y intersection between two barely visible trails, she would pause, her nose working the air, then confidently choose a direction. Every single time. "How do you know where we're going?" I asked her, my voice filled with wonder and growing hope. "How can you possibly know?" The storm began to weaken slightly, but visibility remained almost zero. My world had shrunk to the small circle of ground immediately around my feet and the steady tug of Hope's leash pulling me forward. I'd completely lost any sense of direction or distance. For all I knew, we could be walking deeper into the wilderness, farther from safety with every step. But something in Hope's behavior told me otherwise. Her pace had become more urgent, her breathing more excited. She would occasionally stop and sniff the air intensely, her tail wagging slightly. The first time I'd seen her tail wag since we'd gotten lost. Then, impossibly, I began to smell something familiar. It was faint at first, almost masked by the scent of wet earth and pine needles. But as we continued following Hope's lead, it grew stronger. With smoke. Someone had a fire burning somewhere ahead. "Do you smell that too, girl?" I whispered excitedly. Hope's tail wagged more vigorously and her pace quickened. She was practically pulling me now, her small legs working furiously against the muddy ground. We climbed what felt like a steep hill, my lungs burning from the effort and the cold air. At the top, through the rain, I saw it. A faint golden glow in the distance. Light. Artificial light, which meant civilization, which meant safety. "Hope, you amazing little miracle," I breathed, kneeling to hug her wet, muddy body. "You found help." But as we approached the light source, I realized it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a house or a ranger station. It was something much more puzzling, and the first hint that this story was far stranger than I could have imagined. The light was coming from what appeared to be an old, abandoned cabin. But abandoned cabins don't have smoke rising from their chimneys or warm, inviting glows emanating from their windows. This place looked like it had been waiting for us. Hope sat down in front of the cabin door and looked up at me expectantly, as if to say, "This is where we needed to be." I stood there in the rain, staring at this impossible refuge, wondering how a blind puppy had led me to the one place in miles of wilderness where we could find shelter. The rational part of my mind searched for logical explanations, but deep down I was beginning to suspect that Hope was far more than just a rescue puppy with a disability. She was something else entirely. I knocked on the weathered wooden door, my knuckles barely making a sound over the rain. Hope sat perfectly still beside me, no longer shivering despite being soaked through. It was as if she knew we were safe now, that this strange cabin was exactly where we were supposed to be. The door opened before I could knock a second time. "Sarah," said a gentle voice. "I've been waiting for you." I froze. The woman standing in the doorway was elderly, perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair braided down her back and kind eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. She was completely dry, wearing a simple wool sweater and jeans, as if she'd been sitting by a fire all day instead of weathering the storm that had nearly killed Hope and me. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" I stammered, water dripping from my hair onto the wooden porch. "Not yet," she smiled, stepping aside to let us in. "But Hope knows me, don't you, sweet girl?" At the mention of her name, Hope's tail began wagging furiously. She walked into the cabin as if she owned the place, heading straight for a thick rug by the fireplace and settling down with a contented sigh. The interior of the cabin defied everything I'd seen from outside. Where the exterior looked abandoned and weathered, The inside was warm, cozy, and impeccably maintained. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on subjects I could barely make out in the flickering firelight. The scent of chamomile tea and wood smoke filled the air. "Please sit," the woman said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the fire. "You must be exhausted." "I'm Eleanor, by the way." I remained standing, confusion and suspicion warring in my chest. "How do you know my name? How do you know Hope?" This cabin wasn't on any of the trail maps I studied. Eleanor moved to the kitchen area and began preparing tea, her movements efficient and familiar. "This cabin has been here for 87 years, she said calmly. "My grandmother built it. As for maps, well, not everything that exists appears on maps, Sarah. Some places only reveal themselves when they're needed." "That's impossible." "Is it?" Eleanor turned to face me, two steaming mugs in her hands. "A few hours ago, you would have said it was impossible for a blind puppy to guide you through 5 kilometers of unmarked forest in a storm. Yet here you are." He had a point. I accepted the tea gratefully, letting the warmth seep into my frozen fingers. "How did she do it? Hope, I mean. How did she know where to go?" Eleanor settled into the chair across from me, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. "Tell me, Sarah, what do you know about your puppy's background?" "Her real background?" "The shelter said she was a stray. Born blind, found abandoned at about 8 weeks old." I looked down at Hope, who was now completely relaxed by the fire, looking more at peace than I'd ever seen her. "They said she had no family history, no information about her parents." "The shelter told you what they knew," Eleanor said carefully. "But they didn't know everything." She stood and walked to one of the bookshelves, pulling out a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten notes and what appeared to be genealogical charts. "Hope isn't just any dog, Sarah. She's from a very special bloodline, one that my family has been documenting for over a century." Eleanor opened the journal to a page covered with names and dates. Her great-great-grandmother was named Faith. Her great-grandmother was Charity. Her grandmother was Grace. I stared at the entries, my scientific mind struggling to process what she was suggesting. "You're saying she's, what, some kind of specially bred dog?" "Not bred," Eleanor corrected gently. "Chosen. These dogs appear when they're needed most. Always blind from birth. Always extraordinary in ways that can't be explained by conventional understanding." She turned to another page and I saw photographs, old, sepia-toned images of dogs that looked remarkably similar to Hope. Each photo was accompanied by a story written in careful script. "Faith guided a lost logging crew through a blizzard in 1943, Eleanor read aloud. "Charity led rescuers to a plane crash site in 1967, saving 4 lives. Grace." She paused, her finger tracing the words. "Grace guided my own mother home when she was lost as a child, just like Hope guided you today." The tea mug trembled in my hands. "This is crazy. You're talking about some kind of supernatural dogs that just appear when people need them." "I'm talking about something much more profound than the supernatural," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm talking about purpose. About connections that transcend our normal understanding of the world." She closed the journal and looked directly at me. "Sarah, do you believe it was coincidence that you chose Hope from all the dogs at that shelter? That you decided to take her hiking for the first time on the exact day you'd get lost in a storm?" I wanted to argue, to find logical explanations, but the events of the day had shattered my faith in logic. "If what you're saying is true, then why? Why me? Why now?" Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. "Because your journey isn't over, Sarah. Getting lost today wasn't the problem. It was the beginning of finding something you've been searching for without even knowing it." She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the storm that was finally beginning to subside. "Tomorrow, Hope will guide you home to your house. But that's not really home, is it? That empty place where you've been hiding from life, waiting for blindness to take the last of your independence." Her words hit me like a physical blow because they were absolutely true. Hope didn't just save you from being lost in the forest, Sarah. She's here to save you from being lost in your own life. I spent the night in Eleanor's cabin, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled like lavender and cedar. Hope curled up beside me on the small guest bed, her breathing steady and peaceful. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares about losing my sight. When morning came, the storm had passed completely. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows and I could see the forest clearly, perhaps more clearly than I had in weeks. Eleanor was already up, preparing breakfast and humming an old melody I didn't recognize. "Feel better?" she asked, setting a plate of eggs and toast before me. "Much, thank you." I paused, studying her face in the morning light. "Eleanor, yesterday you said hope was here to save me from being lost in my own life. What did you mean?" Eleanor sat across from me with her own breakfast, choosing her words carefully. "Tell me about the last 2 years, Sarah. Since your diagnosis." The question hit deeper than I expected. I stopped doing most things I enjoyed. Stopped painting. What's the point if I won't be able to see colors soon? Stopped traveling, stopped dating, stopped making plans for the future. I bought the house in the woods to be alone, to prepare for a life of limitations. "You've been grieving," Eleanor said gently. "Grieving a future you thought you were losing. But what if I told you that Hope's family has a history of serving people who are about to discover their greatest gifts?" She pulled out the journal again, turning to a section I hadn't seen the night before. This page contained newspaper clippings and photographs spanning decades. Faith's human companion was a man named Thomas who lost his hearing in the war, Eleanor explained, pointing to a 1944 article. After Faith guided him through that blizzard, he became one of the country's first advocates for deaf rights. He developed a communication system that helped thousands. She turned the page. Charity worked with a woman named Maria who was losing her mobility to polio. After their experience together, Maria revolutionized accessible architecture. Her designs are still used in buildings today. My heart began racing. And Grace. Eleanor's expression grew tender. Grace was my companion. I was born with a condition that left me unable to have children. Something that devastated me in my 20s. I thought my life lacked purpose. She touched a faded photograph of herself as a young woman with a dog identical to Hope. "Grace guided me to this cabin during a similar storm in 1978. That's when I discovered my real calling. Which was documenting and protecting Hope's bloodline. Ensuring that when each new generation appeared, they found their way to the right person at exactly the right moment." Eleanor smiled. "I've spent 47 years preparing for Hope to be born, Sarah. Preparing for you." The weight of her words settled over me like a blanket. "But I'm going blind. How can I have some great purpose if I can't even see?" Eleanor stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving something wrapped in soft cloth. "Sarah, what do you know about your family history? Your grandmother's side specifically." "Not much. My grandmother died when I was young. My mother always said she was unusual. Gifted in ways people didn't understand." Eleanor unwrapped the object. An old photograph of a young woman standing beside a dog that looked exactly like Hope's ancestors. The woman's face was strikingly similar to mine. "Your grandmother was Eleanor Rose Hamilton," she said quietly. "She came to this cabin in 1952, guided by Hope's ancestor during a terrible snowstorm. She was 18 years old and pregnant with your mother." The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers. "That's impossible. Your grandmother had the same genetic condition you have, Sarah. But she didn't see it as a limitation. She saw it as an enhancement. As her physical sight diminished, her other senses became extraordinary. She could navigate by sound and touch better than most people could with perfect vision." Eleanor moved to another section of the cabin, revealing what I now realized was an art studio. Canvases covered the walls, beautiful, vibrant paintings that seemed to glow with life. "She painted these," Eleanor continued. "All of them created after she lost her sight completely. She developed a technique using texture and spatial awareness that no one had ever attempted before. Art critics called her work revolutionary. I approached the paintings with growing wonder. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, abstract yet somehow more real than reality, as if they captured not just how things looked but how they felt, how they existed in space and time." "She left these for you," Eleanor said softly. "Along with her journals, her techniques, and her vision for what art could become when freed from the limitations of conventional sight." Tears streamed down my face as I touched the textured surface of one painting. I could feel the layers of paint, the deliberate strokes, the way each color was applied with absolute precision despite the artist's blindness. "Hope's bloodline doesn't appear randomly, Sarah. They come when someone is ready to transform what seems like a limitation into their greatest strength. Your grandmother started a revolution in adaptive art. You're here to complete it. I turned to look at Hope, who was sitting perfectly still, watching me with those sightless eyes that seemed to see everything. And Hope will be your partner in ways you can't imagine yet. Dogs like her don't just navigate physical spaces. They navigate emotional and creative ones too. She'll help you see what your eyes never could. Eleanor handed me one of my grandmother's journals. Your real journey home doesn't end at your house, Sarah. It begins there. Hope didn't save you from the storm yesterday. She delivered you to your destiny. As I held my grandmother's journal, I felt something shift inside me. The future I'd been dreading suddenly looked different. Not limited but limitless. 3 months later, I stood in the largest art gallery in downtown Seattle, surrounded by paintings I'd created in complete darkness. The opening night of Visions Unseen, the Eleanor Rose Hamilton Memorial Exhibition, had drawn critics, collectors, and curious visitors from across the country. Hope sat beside me wearing a small vest that identified her as my guide dog, though she was so much more than that. Her presence had transformed not just my art, but my entire understanding of what it meant to truly see. Miss Chin, approached a woman with a recorder. I'm Janet Williams from Art Monthly. Could you explain your technique? These paintings are unlike anything we've seen before. I smiled, running my fingers along the textured surface of the nearest canvas. I paint by feel, by sound, by the way Hope's breathing changes when I'm getting the composition right. She somehow senses the emotional weight of each brushstroke before I make it. What I didn't tell the reporter was the whole truth. That Hope had abilities that went far beyond normal canine intuition. She could sense the flow of creative energy, guiding my hand to exactly where each color belonged. When I painted with her by my side, it felt like collaboration with something divine. The exhibition was selling out. Every piece had been purchased, with proceeds going to establish the Hope Foundation, a program that paired specially trained dogs with artists who had visual impairments. What we'd discovered in my grandmother's journals had laid the groundwork for something revolutionary. Sarah, Eleanor appeared at my elbow. She'd driven down from the cabin for the opening, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the crowd. There's someone I want you to meet. She led me to a quiet corner where a young man stood studying one of my paintings with intense concentration. He was probably in his 20s, with the cautious posture of someone navigating the world without sight. This is Marcus, Eleanor said gently. He lost his vision in an accident 6 months ago. He was a sculptor before. I extended my hand, which Marcus found and shook firmly. The texture in this painting, he said, his voice filled with wonder. I can actually feel the emotion. How is that possible? Because emotion has texture, I replied, understanding flooding through me. Just like Hope taught me that direction has scent and distance has sound. When we lose one sense, we don't become limited. We become specialized. Eleanor cleared her throat softly. Marcus, I have someone I'd like you to meet. From behind a nearby pillar emerged a woman holding the leash of a small puppy, another golden retriever, identical to Hope in every way except for one detail. This puppy's eyes held the same milky, unseeing quality that marked Hope's extraordinary bloodline. This is Grace, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. Hope's daughter. My breath caught. I looked down at Hope, who was sitting perfectly still but with her tail wagging slightly. When did she? 3 weeks ago, Eleanor smiled. Hope disappeared for 2 days, something that had never happened before. When she returned, I knew. The bloodline continues when it's needed. Marcus knelt down as Grace approached him, her small paws moving with the same confident purpose I'd witnessed in Hope. The moment their hands touched, I saw something shift in Marcus's expression. The same recognition I'd felt that first day in the storm. She's beautiful, he whispered, and Grace settled against his leg as if she'd been waiting her entire short life for this moment. I turned to Eleanor, pieces of understanding falling into place. The cabin. You're not just the keeper of the bloodline, are you? You're the one who ensures each dog finds their person. Eleanor nodded. It's been my purpose for 47 years. But Sarah, I'm 86 now. The time has come to pass this responsibility to someone else. The weight of her words settled over me like destiny. You want me to take over? Not just you. Eleanor looked meaningfully at Hope and then at Grace with Marcus. All of you. The foundation you're creating, it's bigger than art, bigger than any of us imagined. You're going to change how the world understands disability, limitation, and human potential. As if summoned by our conversation, more people approached, a blind musician who'd heard about the exhibition, a deaf artist interested in tactile painting techniques, a veteran with PTSD who'd found healing through adaptive creativity. Each person seemed drawn not just to the art but to something deeper. Hope stood and moved among them, her presence somehow calming and inspiring everyone she encountered. Watching her, I finally understood the true magnitude of what had happened that stormy day 3 months ago. I hadn't been rescued from being lost. I'd been delivered to where I belonged. "Eleanor," I said, my voice steady with newfound certainty, "when do we start?" She handed me a familiar leather journal. Not my grandmother's but a new one, its pages blank and waiting. "We already have, dear. We already have." That night, as I sat in my art studio with Hope beside me, I opened the new journal and began to write. Not about the dogs or their mysterious abilities, but about the people they'd touched. Marcus and Grace were already inseparable, and I could see in his face the same transformation I'd experienced. The storm that had seemed like a disaster was actually a delivery system. Hope hadn't guided me home, she'd guided me to my true calling. And now, together we would guide others to theirs. Outside my window, I could hear the sound of rain beginning to fall. Somewhere out there, another person was probably getting lost, thinking their world was ending. They had no idea their real journey was just about to begin. Hope lifted her head, ears perked, and I smiled. After all, we had work to do.